Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're doing something really fun. We're peeling back the layers of a famous literary myth, the world of the Three Musketeers, to reveal the shocking historical and honestly, surprisingly economic realities underneath. Now, most of us know the story, right? Swashbuckling heroes, epic sword fights, unbreakable brotherhood. But the actual history that inspired Alexandre Dumas' masterpiece is, I'd argue, even more fascinating than the fiction itself. To truly wrap our heads around the world of the Musketeers, we actually have to start not in 17th century France, but with a completely bizarre true story from 1829. The Earl of Winchelsea wrote a letter to none other than the Duke of Wellington, stating, "The satisfaction which your grace has demanded, it is of course impossible for me to decline." What's he doing here? He's formally accepting a challenge to a pistol duel. Okay, get this. These two incredibly powerful, well-established men literally stood out in a field and fired lethal shots at each other over a relatively minor political disagreement regarding the Roman Catholic relief bill. The Duke felt his honor was slighted, he demanded a public apology, didn't get it, and so they dueled. Both of them messed, and immediately after the shots were fired, the Earl simply pulled out a pre-written letter of apology. To our modern mindset, that sounds completely absurd, doesn't it? So you really have to wonder why. Why did historical elites, we're talking generals, dukes, leading politicians, constantly risk death over seemingly trivial insults, like a bumped shoulder or dropped handkerchief? Keep that question in the back of your mind because it's actually the hidden engine driving the entire Musketeer mythos. Section 1. The Myth of the Musketeers. To solve this mystery, let's step into the vibrant, swashbuckling world of 17th century France that we all know from the classic story. Dumas didn't just pull his settings out of thin air. He brilliantly anchored his legendary tale in real historically significant places. He used Gascony, which is a region in southwestern France famous for the boastful bravado and fierce passion of its people, to really ground his idealistic hero. He then juxtaposed that with the dark, shadowy political intrigue of Paris, where the Louvre was this maze of midnight meetings and deadly ambushes. And he tied it all to grand historical conflicts, like the Siege of La Rochelle, a Protestant port city rebelling against the Catholic regime. The geography itself tells a massive story. Section 2. Meet the real D'Artagnan. Let's peel back another layer of the onion and meet the actual historical figure behind the legendary fiction. There's a pretty stark contrast between Dumas's timeline and historical reality. You see, Dumas relied on a set of heavily fictionalized memoirs by an author named Courtils de Sandras. In the famous novel, D'Artagnan arrives in Paris in 1625 and constantly battles the machinations of Cardinal Richelieu. But in reality, the real D'Artagnan, Charles de Batz the Castelmour, didn't leave for Paris until the 1640s, and instead of fighting the Cardinal, well, actually, scratch that, he served as a highly trusted spy and operative for Richelieu's successor, Cardinal Mazarin. And this guy lived a seriously wild life. After joining the Guards, his most famous real-world exploit happened in 1661. King Louis XIV personally tasked him with arresting Nicolas Fouquet, the incredibly powerful finance commissioner, who had just thrown this extravagant feast that completely upstaged the king. D'Artagnan literally had to guard him for a solid 4 years to prevent bribery and escape. He eventually died in battle in 1673 at the Siege of Maastricht, and incredibly, back in March 2023, researchers believe they uncovered his remains beneath a church altar in the Netherlands. They even found a French coin and a lead musket ball right next to the skeleton. No way, right? Section 3. The Economics of Dueling. Let's move to our next layer and uncover the hidden, underlying mechanics of their world. Which brings us right back to our core mystery. We have to ask ourselves why a real-life D'Artagnan would aggressively challenge 3 completely different men, Athos, Porthos, and Aramis, to lethal duels in a single afternoon over simple misunderstandings on the street. It wasn't just hot-headedness, guys. It was a deeply ingrained social system. Samuel Johnson actually summed this up perfectly. He said, "An affront must be resented to avoid being banished from society." In the aristocratic world, avoiding a duel meant total banishment from polite society. It was literally a social death sentence. If you back down, your reputation was absolutely destroyed. So facing a potentially lethal sword or pistol was, strangely enough, the only logical choice to retain your standing and your livelihood. And this brings us to an absolutely incredible economic theory from researchers at Simon Fraser University. Dueling was actually an institutional screening mechanism to prove you had what economists call social capital. Think of it like an extreme life-or-death credit score. In an era before modern bureaucracies, resumes, or background checks, high-level jobs were handed out purely through patronage. To be trusted as a political partner, you had to prove you were deeply invested in the elite group. Your social capital acted as hostage capital, basically a bond ensuring you wouldn't cheat your patron, because if you did, you'd lose everything. Okay, let's break down this dense game theory into 4 simple steps. First, the establishment, like the king or a powerful patron, chooses a reservation level of social capital required to enter their elite circle. Second, individuals invest heavily in acquiring this capital through elite schools, networks, and military service, stuff that's really hard to observe directly. Third, to prove they've made that investment, they're forced to decide whether or not to duel when challenged. Rejecting the duel screens you out. Accepting it proves your worth. And finally, step 4. Because you've proven you have so much to lose, you can now be trusted to be honest in high-stakes political traits. So the big takeaway here, dueling wasn't just mindless violence or men acting crazy. It was a highly structured, absolutely crucial networking requirement. It was an economic tool to enforce trust and secure patronage among the ruling class. It filtered out marginal aristocrats who couldn't be trusted with the keys to the kingdom. It completely changes how we view those hot-headed sword fights in the movies, doesn't it? They were actually calculated business transactions. Section 4. The mastermind Alexandre Dumas. So who took these dry historical facts and dense socioeconomic practices and turned them into a global literary phenomenon? That mastermind was Alexandre Dumas. Born in 1802, Dumas had this unmatched genius for turning the raw history of 17th century patronage into pure, captivating adventure. Interestingly, scholars believe Dumas drew heavy inspiration from his own father, General Thomas Alexandre Dumas, who was a Haitian-born mixed-race general in the French army. In fact, that legendary scene of D'Artagnan challenging 3 men to duels in one single day, it's thought to be based directly on a youthful incident involving his own father. And if you look at real historical artifacts, like his original holographic manuscripts from the Digital Howard collection, you see what a multifaceted powerhouse Dumas really was. We see everything from a political attack piece on diplomacy regarding Poland to an untitled poem, to this furious rebuttal to religious authorities who wrongly attributed a play written by his son to him. There's even an address soliciting votes for the National Assembly. He wasn't just writing fiction in a vacuum. He was deeply embedded in the politics and passions of his own time. And that's what breathes such life into his historical novels. Dumas was a genius because he knew exactly when to abandon historical accuracy for the sake of a really good story. In reality, the men who inspired Athos, Porthos, and Aramis were real musketeers, sure, but they had relatively brief or entirely unlinked careers. Dumas just took them and forged them into an inseparable, legendary brotherhood. Even better, he took a tiny, obscure historical footnote and fully invented the ultimate antagonist, the terrifying, brilliant, and entirely fictitious Milady de Winter, allowing her to completely dominate the second half of the novel. He fused fact and fiction perfectly. Section 5. A swashbuckling legacy. Finally, let's zoom out and look at the massive legacy he left behind. Dumas' specific tropes, the unbreakable bonds, the witty banter, and that high-stakes scheme of dangerous social capital, they've echoed through the centuries. His romanticized version of history continues to inspire intricate homages across completely different modern genres today, from film to animation to high fantasy. You can actually see this direct, almost mathematical influence in Stephen Brust's popular fantasy series, the Kavran romances. Brust mapped the Musketeers perfectly into his fictional Dragodorarian empire. It's so cool. D'Artagnan becomes Kavran, an adventurous nobleman. The deeply honorable Athos maps to Eric. The clever, scheming Aramis becomes Pell, and the boisterous, battle-hungry Porthos is reborn as the female warrior to Zendra. And Brest's homage brilliantly extends way beyond just the characters. He matches the exact narrative structure. For instance, the first book, The Phoenix Cards, mirrors the original Musketeer novel, and the sequel, 500 years after, mirrors Dumas's 20 years after. Furthermore, Brust uses a fictional, in-universe narrator named Parfy, who deliberately and hilariously satirizes Dumas's incredibly verbose, tangent-filled 19th century writing style. It is an absolute masterclass in literary tribute. When we look at the Three Musketeers, we aren't just looking at a simple adventure story. We're looking at a masterfully woven tapestry. So I'll leave you with this. How does this fascinating blend of actual history, brutal economic survival tactics dressed up as honor, and pure imaginative fiction continue to shape the most enduring cultural legends we consume today? Keep questioning the myths around you.